Well, if it's just us, it's just us. It'll just be me in the video anyway. So we're here today to make donut puffs. They're like little donut muffins and granola bars, which are really, really healthy and then not quite as much, but they're very small and they're nice treats. So the donut muffins are sort of our guilty pleasure, but that's why we make them small. And they freeze really well, so you don't have to keep them all out and leave them on the counter where they're really tempting. I'm going to give a lot of them away maybe, but and they're a really nice treat. But having a little bite of a donut isn't the worst thing in the world every once in a while, and then having these great granola bars is the alternative, which we should all choose a little bit more often than the donuts. But they've got a good amount of sugar, all natural sugars. They've got peanuts or almond butter, whatever you choose to use, a good amount of nuts, and then oats. And I'm adding some dried cranberries to mine because I really like that with the almonds. Any dried fruit would go really well, or those banana chips would be a really nice textural addition, or chocolate chips or peanut butter chips or any of those kinds of things would be nice. So making two recipes today, we have to look and decide which one takes the longest. The donut muffins we want to get into the oven. While they bake, we can make the other recipe, and it's going to be pretty quick and easy today. So I have our bowl here we're going to be measuring everything into for the little donut puffs. I also have my oven at 375, and I have a little muffin tray which is prepared with some pan spray. If you don't have a little mini muffin tray, you can always make these in regular size muffin pans. And then you have big little donut muffins, but they would just need to bake longer. You would have to test them with a little toothpick just to make sure that they're baked through, coming out clean, no raw batter on the inside. And you could also make them in a donut pan if you have one of those. They make those like little ring molds. You can actually put the batter into that, and it'll bake a little cake-style donut. So those are options on pans. And but I've got mine just with a little bit of pan spray. You don't need a ton, but just kind of coating the bottom and the sides a little bit. You can always rub using a paper towel with canola oil or something like that. Baking spray works great also. You want to make sure that you have greased the pan in some way. So that's ready to go. Oven is ready to go. We're going to mix there's a typo on this recipe, by the way, if you printed this or are looking at this as a resource. It says mix half a cup sugar, and then it says third a cup of butter, but we're mixing the first quarter cup of butter, not third cup. So that should be a quarter cup. Third cup, I'm going to change it in our database, so hopefully this won't reflect to the future, but for today's workshop, we're going to be mixing half a cup sugar and then a quarter cup of the melted butter. And that's only differentiated because later on we've got another quarter cup of butter melted that we're going to be dipping into. So this is the first quarter cup of butter plus a half a cup of sugar. Oh, this can be pretty much any kind of sugar. You could, well, not really brown, but you could use coconut sugar. You could use raw sugar. I'm just using regular white cane sugar. So a half a cup of sugar. And then we're going to put in a quarter cup of the melted butter. I melted all of mine together since I knew we would need some later. So I'm just going to measure it out, a quarter cup of it for now. And then the rest will be for later as we dip the little tops of the donut puffs in. So that's half a cup of sugar, quarter cup of melted butter. Do you want to make sure that you get all of that out of your measuring cup, depending on the style of measuring cup that you're using. So if you need to use a little spatula, that's great. And then we're mixing in our nutmeg at this point, and it is just 3/4 of a teaspoon. This is a good amount of nutmeg. This is where all of the sort of classic cake donut flavor comes from. So that's going to go right into that. Also, 3/4 of a teaspoon of ground nutmeg. I'm using a quarter teaspoon measurer here, so I'm going to have to do that 3 times. Nutmeg is classic in a lot of cakes and donuts. All right, so that's just going to mix together. I'm using that same spatula I just used because dishes. I'm going to get that just kind of gently mixed until it's sort of a paste. We're going to be stirring in everything else, and that's going to end up bringing it all together. You can use a whisk. You could be using a KitchenAid mixer and use the paddle attachment and have it on low. We're not too worried about like beating it or making it like super, super fluffy like we would if we were beating in eggs or anything in this situation right now. Okay. We are going to stir in our milk, which is just a half a cup of milk. Leave it cold until the last minute when possible. Half a cup right in. You're going to stir it in so it actually incorporates pretty well. And then we're going to stir in our dry ingredients, our flour and our baking powder. You want to mix the milk in now and kind of get this to be your solid liquid. And then we're going to be mixing in the dry. So you can just stir that in carefully. If you're using a smaller bowl, don't splash it on yourself. Just get it pretty well mixed. I think I am going to switch to a whisk at this point. I want to kind of make sure that that butter, which was melted and liquid, which is now starting to solidify because it's cold with the milk, I want to make sure that it gets really emulsified in together and I have kind of a broken down, a little bit more smooth mixture. Doesn't have to be perfect though, because once the flour goes in, it really does blend all together. We are going to be putting in baking powder and flour just until mixed. This is one of the things we don't want to overmix. There it is, just a teaspoon of baking powder and then a cup of flour. I always recommend using unbleached flour, but any white flour is fine. If you're using like a gluten-free mix, you would use the exact same measurement, just like a cup for cup blend. So that's 1 teaspoon of baking powder, not soda. We want this is going to make it nice and fluffy. Baking powder helps. Not only is it a leavening agent, it gives it the rise, but baking powder specifically is a bit more of a fluffy agent. Baking soda can help you get a little bit more of a crispy like cookie. So we want a nice fluff in our donut puffs, and our flour is just 1 cup. If you were going to make these whole wheat, you would reduce the flour amount a little bit, maybe by up to 1/4 of a cup worth. So you would start with about 3/4 of a cup of whole wheat flour and then mix it in and see if that looks good. It's denser flour, so you don't need as much of it in certain recipes. But you could definitely make these a whole wheat donut. Get some of those extra whole grains into your diet in the morning, which is nice. So 1 cup of flour going right in after that baking powder. Now I'm going to mix this just until combined. So that's pretty much it. Make sure that I've gotten all of the like lumps of dry flour. Yeah. I don't want to overmix it. I don't want to make these dense donuts. We want them to be as airy and kind of light as possible. And it's like a muffin. If you were in our baking class, the muffin method, you definitely don't want to overmix it, just because then you'll get a really like hard muffin. We want a nice fluffy donut muffin here. So it's not that much batter. Make sure that any of that dry flour off the sides gets mixed in here. You can use that little spatula or a different tool you were using before maybe. A spoon would be good. So we're going to scoop this into our prepared little muffin pans, or whichever pan you have and are using. I'm going to be filling these little muffin cups up only halfway full. So I'm going to use a little scoop that I have. It's one of those little like mini ice cream scoops. You can absolutely just use a spoon and just kind of fill it up halfway until that is it. You don't want it to go too high up the little cup. So we're just going to, I'm going to see about how much one of these little scoops fills. Yeah, so this is it usually says on the handle somewhere on the inside. I can't find it right now. I'll find it. It's like I think it's a half-ounce scoop. Anyway, it's probably about a tablespoon measurement, so you could use a tablespoon also. And just until you fill up each muffin about halfway. And then if you have any extra batter, you can always go back through. When you're using one of these kinds of scoops, you want to make sure that you use the side of the bowl to scrape it flat so that it's a level scoop, not a big mounded scoop, unless the recipe specifically is calling for a cookie and you're measuring it out to be like a mounded scoop. But usually you want a level scoop because then you know that you're getting the same amount in every single cup. Way that you can have nice consistent baking. So you just kind of scrape it against the side of the bowl to get that nice level scoop. Dollop in each little cup. And then we're going to bake these just for about 15 minutes in that oven, which is preheated to 375. When they come out of the oven, we're going to dip them, just the tops. I like to just do the tops so that the bottoms can stay a little drier and not get greasy too much. So you just dip the little top of the muffin into the rest of the melted butter that we have. And we're going to make a nice cinnamon sugar mixture and dip it into that. So we'll have our little sugar crowned donut puff muffins. They're really good. I'm definitely going to have to give them away quickly so that I don't eat them all today. So almost done. And then these are going to go right into the oven. It seems like I am getting down to the batter, so it's just the perfect amount this recipe makes. So you need to use a spatula to scrape up the last little bit. Then, you know, it all counts. So you just need to get all of it out of the bowl. Might be one shy. Let's see. I had a pastry chef in culinary school that said the better you could scrape your bowl clean with your spatula, the more money you save for your bakery over time. She's not wrong. That's only partially scraped, and that's like a whole nother donut puff. And there's still some in there. So when you consider how much I also like tend to kind of put into the sink, like, oh, it's just the scrapes, but that's a whole nother donut puff you don't want to miss out on. Plus, if you're running a bakery or when you're considering your home budget, that's money. Especially when you're dealing with certain ingredients that are not cheap. Butter is not necessarily cheap for everybody. Nutmeg is not necessarily cheap. All right. I've almost got the last one completely full. This is really down to the wire in this recipe, which is fun. No waste here. I also might have put a little too much in one or the other of these, but that's okay. Make it work. Get it all filled up, and then these are going to go right into the oven on the middle rack. You want it right in the center of your oven, as centered as possible, so it has nice consistent heat all the way around. And then we're going to set our timer for 10 minutes. I know the recipe says 15, but we want to check them just to be sure everything is looking good and that we probably will want to spin them around halfway. So to make sure that they kind of settle out a little bit before you put them in the oven, this is a little fun thing you can do. You just kind of smash it down on the counter once, and you get a nice flattened effect. Gravity helps and the force helps with that. If you want to put it on a sheet pan to put it in the oven, if that's easier for you to then get it in and out of the oven, it's a really good, helpful thing to do. These aren't going to spill over, so I'm not worried about a mess underneath the tray or anything like that, but it does make it easier to pull the muffin pan in and out of the oven for some people. I understand that. So if you want to put it on a cookie sheet and then put it in the oven, perfectly okay. It won't mess up the baking. So we're going to set our timer for 10 minutes. That's going. Set a couple things aside here. And then we're going to move into our granola bars, which are really simple and tasty. I'm going to be using a food processor to help with that because it really helps with that. But if you don't have a food processor specifically, you could do a lot of the chopping in a good blender that has like a pulse option or a Ninja or even one of those old school slap chops. That would work really well for this because all you're trying to do is break down the dates and the nuts. And then we're going to be mixing the rest of it in a bowl. So it's not like you need this for the entire process. You could also very easily chop up the almonds and the dates with a knife on a cutting board. Just rough chop them up so that you get a good something that is chunky but that's going to hold together when it's bound in a granola bar, obviously. So I'm going to use this just to pulse up the dates and the almonds. So let me get that recipe going. Pretty simple. We're using the dates. Hopefully, if you're making this, you got ones with the pits already removed. It makes it a lot easier. If not, make sure you remove them before you put them in your chopper. Bad for the blade. You can use maple syrup or honey. Those are obviously two very different flavors. So it's really up to you what kind of flavor you might want, especially in the morning. What's your kind of go-to thing? Is it maple? Is it honey? That's up to you. But that is our natural sweetener. Also the dates. Dates are pretty high in natural sugars, but it'll get you through the day. It's a lot of really good energy. And when you eat it in the morning, you're going to burn it all up. It's really good. I'm using regular peanut butter. I just got guilty pleasure, like a Jif or Skippy, I think. And then, but you can use any kind, raw, toasted, untoasted, almond. You could even use sunflower. That would be a different flavor, but it would be really good. That would be a really good option. And you wanted to make sure that if you got almonds, they were not salted. If they were not roasted, if you got raw, that's fine. You just need to roast them in the oven. So you could do that while your muffins are baking if you needed to. 350, 375 is a fine temperature for nut toasting. You would just really need to pay attention to them because they go from being not done yet to burnt in a very short amount of time. So, you know, you check them after 5 minutes and keep looking at them. But toast, what we want is toasted almonds, not salted though. We don't want to add that kind of heavy salt to our breakfast bar. I am using dried cranberries as an add-in. Like I said, I really like that flavor with the almonds, and I really like that in a bar. It's just a good consistency. So I've got my dates and my almonds. I've got my honey. I'm using honey because that's the flavor that I like and that I want. And you've got regular old-fashioned oats. These should not be instant oats. Those will get a little bit too mushy and kind of chewy in this situation. They won't hold up quite as well in a bar. You want just regular old-fashioned oats for this one. Steel cut or Irish oats, like oatmeal, wouldn't work. Just regular old-fashioned baking oats. I use Quaker, but it does not matter. I know that all store brands have their own, and they're usually cheaper. So when it comes to that kind of thing, unless you're going into business making like artisan bread, you can get the store brand unbleached flour. It's going to work just as well in your donut puffs as the fancy King Arthur or like Bob's Mills or anything like that. There are certain things where the better flours or the better products matter, but most of the time they're the same product. They're just got a different label on it. So whatever is, this was like 2 for $5 or something, you know, was it on sale? So got that one. You can mix in other things. I'm doing the cranberries. Chocolate chips are good. Like the recipe, the banana chips are one of my other favorite things. I just didn't get that this time because that gives that like little crunch in it, which is really, really nice to have the different textures going on. So very simply, we are, you want to prepare a dish. I don't have an 8x8 or 9x9 square baking dish. All of these things are making me realize what I kind of want to put on my wish list for my kitchen. I don't have one. I have this shallow baking dish that is more like an oblong, I would say 6 by 9 kind of a dish, it does not matter. It really, really doesn't. As long as you aren't going so big of a pan that your mixture is going to be very flat along the bottom, that's not what we're looking for. Anything that's remotely in the same size and shape of an 8 by 8 inch square baking pan. If you have a Pyrex dish that's like 9 by 13, you could put some foil in it to make it 9 by 9-ish, and then just fill it up that much, and that works great. What's most important in this situation though is that you line it with either plastic, parchment, or I'm using foil. You can make sure that it's just pressed all the way up to the sides as well as you can, as flat as you can, and leaving the overlapped flaps like sticking out, because that's going to be how we get these bars out of the pan later. Whatever you're having to use, parchment or plastic or foil, that's going to be how we lift them up out once they're like set up and firm and cold, and then we can cut them and stuff. And it makes it so much easier to get them out of the pan. So you definitely need to line your pan with something when you're doing this process. So that is ready to go. I'm going to start by pulsing. We definitely don't want to just turn it on and walk away. We want to pulse the dates into just until they're pulsed up and they kind of come together into a ball. And then we're going to put those in a bowl. I need to chop up my almonds though, so I'm going to do that in this food processor while I have it out, because I got whole almonds, whole toasted unsalted almonds that need to be chopped. So I'm going to do a couple things here, and then we're going to just put it all into a bowl, which I have over there, and everything is happening. So 1 cup of dates. Definitely make sure they have the pits removed. That is key here. So I'm using a 1/3 cup measure just because that's what I have. So I'm going to do 3 of these. You're looking for a loose measurement of dates, about a 1/3 cup, going for a full cup here. All right. So my dates, I'm just going to pulse again, like I said, just to get them chopped up. But if I ran them and walked away, if I just turned this on and walked away, it would actually become a puree very quickly. And we don't want to make date butter right now, although that is delicious. Side note. Just pulse it. So that just means turn it on. You use the pulse button, and you're just pressing it over and over again until this chops it up. Once it's coming together in a ball and it starts to kind of look a little bit more like dough, then it's ready. You're trying to break it down a lot so it becomes incredibly sticky. We're getting all of those sugars out. We're obviously breaking it up so that it spreads out into all of our bars. But this is a really helpful binder in this situation as well. All right. So looking at it, I can see that it's clumping together in these kinds of very sticky, clumpy balls of dates. So that's where we want it to be. That's good. And it's nice and chopped up into even small pieces. Okay. So I'm going to put that into a big bowl, set it aside. I'm going to get ready and just chop up my almonds because they should be rough chopped. Don't want to put whole almonds into these. It won't hold together at all. They'll just kind of make the whole thing fall apart. So if you have almond pieces already, if you've bought that, that's fantastic. If you want to just rough chop your almonds with a knife, that's also perfectly fine. But since I have the machine ready to go, I'm just going to pop them in here. So we need, it's going to end up being a whole cup of the rough chopped almonds. So I'm going to do that now so that it is ready. One more. to equal a cup. Okay. This is going to be loud. I apologize in advance. I'm going to be pulsing these also into just kind of a rough chop, but it's loud with nuts. Sorry. If I were to turn this on and walk away, I would end up with almond flour, which is wonderful for gluten-free baking, but not so much for these bars. So you want to be attentive and just pulse it just enough so that we've got those kind of nice rough chops. If you look in and there's any almonds that are still super full, just we're going to give it a couple more pulses and see how it looks. But that was our handy timer, so we want to check our donut cups. That was an early timer set for 10 minutes instead of 15. But my oven is uneven, as are a lot, so I'm going to spin it halfway, 180 degrees. I'll show you here. They're puffing nicely. They're going to look good, but we're looking for a nice golden brown. And we want to make sure that there's no raw batter in the middle. So we're definitely, I just spun the whole tray 180 degrees so that we get nice even cooking on all sides. And I'm going to set my timer for another 5 minutes. I think it's going to take the full 15. They're going to be really delicious. So I've got my almonds, a couple more pulses. I think that's going to be nice and chopped up enough, plenty rough. And then that goes right into the, no, this is set to the side. Because all we're going to mix into that bowl first is our dates, got that, our maple syrup or honey, if you're adding that. We're going to be warming that up with the peanut butter. So get a little pot, put that on the stove. I'm setting this aside because we are done with the chopper. Everything else is going to be happening in that bowl. We just want to clear this space here. Oops. This thing, the plunger, oh man, that falls out of that food processor every single time. Be careful if you have one of those. They go everywhere. Okay, so we're going to be warming up our honey and our peanut butter in a small pot. We want to get that. That is going to be our, like the main binder of this situation. So we're working with a 1/4 cup of your honey or maple syrup. And then it's going to be equal parts, I think, yeah, 1/4 cup of the peanut butter. You can use any of the kind of butters, almond butter, sunflower, like I said. You just don't want it to be the chunky kind. Those nuts, it'll actually sort of inhibit some of the binding of the other ingredients. It's an interesting thing. Although, you could probably just add a little bit more of the oats, and that would like counteract the stickiness. It would be fine. If you really, really love chunky peanut butter, I'm not going to stop you. I'm running out of honey. Maybe I'll make it both. I don't have enough honey coming out of there. The rest is kind of stuck to the bottom. That happens. See if I have any maple. Well, I just have the like corn syrup kind. Mine's going to be a combination of flavors, which is going to be really good. Little hint of maple in my honey. Can't be bad. Okay, now I've got my full 1/4 cup. See, it's very forgiving. You don't have to even have all of the right ingredients. I thought that I had just enough honey, but it's like sugared on the bottom, which is salvageable. It's definitely not bad. Honey almost never goes bad. Thousands of years later, it's still good. But I just need to warm it up and get those crystals to break down. But for now, I'm going to have my maple and my honey, and I'm going to do a 1/4 cup of peanut butter. If you're using the kind you have to stir up, definitely make sure that you stir it up really, really, really well. You don't want too much of like extra oil. You want it to be very pasty here. So I'm going to do a 1/4 cup of peanut butter. I want this to be a pretty exact measurement. A little more would be okay, but a little less wouldn't be that great just because This again, this with the honey and maple is the main binder. It's going to turn into a nice sort of warm, sticky, gooey glue right here, which is delicious and messy. Put that in the pan, and you see I've just got literally peanut butter and honey. I'm just going to stir it together. As it starts to melt over a sort of medium-low heat, then it'll come together really well as the peanut butter. It doesn't liquefy completely, but it will get loose enough so that it all kind of emulsifies a bit. The honey gets warm fast. You just want to keep stirring it because the honey will help keep the peanut butter, as it warms up, it wants to separate. So you just keep stirring that honey in, and that will help keep it as an emulsified liquid. So you see how now it's completely mixed together? Just a little bit of time over the heat. Instead of the dollop of peanut butter on top of honey, now it's completely mixed. You want to let it stay warm, and we want to let it be as loose and runny as possible because we're going to be pouring it over the other ingredients in the bowl. So we've got our dates in this bowl already. So I'm keeping this on the lowest setting that it is right now, but I'm going to keep a serious eye on it because I don't want it to like stick and burn, but I want it to stay warm and liquidy. So keep it on the lowest possible setting on your burner, right where you can see it. And then we're going to be moving into adding the rest of the ingredients into this bowl. There's not that many other ingredients. We need to add our chopped almonds. Let's see, wait. We're going to warm that, stir and pour over the, yeah. Almonds, oats, and dates in this bowl. The oats are 1.5 cups. Where is all my cups? 1. Nice even measurement. 1.5. Let's see. I'm gonna have to use my 1/4 cup twice. 1, 2. That's all out of there. Okay. We're gonna mix this together. Just break up the dates a little bit. You don't need to worry about this being perfectly combined right now because you're going to do that when you add in your syrup here, your sort of peanut butter liquid stuff. I'm adding in an add-on, the cranberries. If you're adding in an add-on, you want to put that in now. The measurement is really kind of up to you. We've been doing a cup of everything else. You know, there's a cup of the dates, a cup of the almonds, a cup of the oats. I don't want a full cup of these cranberries. Then we wouldn't have enough to bind it. But I do want enough to flavor it, so I'm going to go for about 1/4 cup. Just to kind of spread that out. Make sure I get a little bit of cranberry in each bite. It's kind of nice. It's also adding some nice color. Okay, it's just sort of slightly broken up and mixed together. We're going to be pouring over this, everything's happening. Okay, before we do that, we definitely want to check our donut cup. Yeah, okay, here we are. So you can see here, oh, I can really smell the nutmeg, it smells so good. They're browned along the edges. It's kind of like a ring around the edge, plus they've come away. Whenever you're baking anything, when it's come away from the sides a little bit, then it's probably pretty ready. So these are good to go. I can also tell that the top is very firm. It springs to my touch. It doesn't like sink in and stay. There's no raw middle in there. Plus they're going to carry over cooking for a good amount of time. I've got a rack right here. I'm just going to set them on for about 2 minutes while we finish mixing these granola bars and while they are too hot for me to touch. And then when they have cooled off for just a few minutes, I'm going to start dipping them and getting them into that butter sugar situation. But that's set aside now. If you're still in the oven, make sure you're watching your donuts, but they should be done pretty soon if you were on track there. Pouring in our peanut butter and honey mixture. You want to make sure that you get all of it. I'm turning off the heat. I'm going to use this spatula and pour it over the whole thing. Interesting to see peanut butter in kind of a liquid form, but it's like peanut sauce, except it wouldn't taste like that at all. All right, so make sure you get all of it out of that pan. Every little last drop counts, so you want to scrape it really well, just like the bowl earlier with our donut puffs. Every donut puff counts. All right. Set this aside. I'm going to use this big spatula just because things are, if you're using sticky things, silicone is nice to use because you can kind of scrape it away easier. I just find it's a little bit easier for me when I'm baking. So I'm going to start from the bottom and kind of scoop up and into that peanut mixture, and then I'm kind of chopping into the middle. So from the bottom and then chopping it in, like I'm cutting the peanut honey glaze into all of the other ingredients. But this also, you really want to make sure that you're breaking up all of those clumps of dates. Because we got like huge clumps of dates on one side of the pan and then no dates on the other side of the pan. It would be sad for our granola bars. So you're folding and chopping and mixing all kind of with the same tool, which is also why I really like these sturdy silicone spatulas. These wonderful ones, if you see them on Amazon or at the stores, I highly recommend. They're just restaurant quality. They're made by the company Bollrath, which does mostly pots and pans, but it's treated to the highest temperatures. It's really, really sturdy. The handle doesn't break. It's easy to clean, dishwasher safe. These are my favorite rubber spatulas. Side note, there you go. Okay, so as we mix this in and chop it really well, you are making sure that those big clumps of dates get broken down, but it's looking like it's pretty well combined. I don't see any like huge amounts of any one thing anywhere. So we're going to put this into our prepared pan by just pouring it in and pressing it down. So I'm going to wear gloves, but if you don't have gloves, then plastic wrap. So you can just put a little bit of plastic wrap over what you're pressing down and use that to keep your hands from sticking to it too. Okay, so transfer to the prepared pan, pressing down firmly. You're going to make sure that foil is flat. Just put this in here. Scoop it all in. Make sure you get all that flavor. Okay. Gloves for me. Again, plastic wrap would work really well. You could just put like a little piece of plastic on both hands, or you just cover this with a sheet of plastic wrap and then you press down onto that. Otherwise, you are going to get a lot of this sticking to your hands, and then it becomes kind of a process of trying to get it back off your hands and into the thing. So, pressing it down. The more you press and the harder you press, the firmer your granola bars will be, and the more they will hold together over time. So, you want to make sure that, one, it's evenly spread out, and two, it's extremely well packed. So that's kind of the fun project. I know a lot of times in our breakfast classes we get some workout, either mixing things or stirring things or whatever. This is your workout for the morning in our breakfast class. You can really get some leverage on it and push really, really hard down. As flat as you can. If you have like a wine bottle that you use for rolling pasta, like you could press down on things. You could find something that would be nice and firm. The bottom of a pot, maybe, if you thought that would help you get to the edges. A lot of cooks do a lot of different things. I tend to believe my hands are the best tool that I have, but sometimes you really, really want to get some solid pressure onto these, pushing them hard as you can while keeping them as evenly spread out as possible. So I think this is as dense as they're going to get. So I'm going to cover it. I'm going to put it in the fridge. You could put it in the freezer and it would take even less time. I kind of don't like to freeze grains like this just because they get that kind of like freezer burn thing happening pretty quickly. So I'm just going to wrap it in plastic and put it in the fridge, and in 15 minutes it's going to be ready to cut, hopefully right in time. I'll be able to pull it out and cut it right at the end of class. So you definitely want to wrap it because, I'm thinking the plastic was somewhere else, because it will dry out, the top of it, and you don't want that to happen. You want to keep it nice and sticky. So cover, any kind of cover. You don't have to press down on it. You're just covering it up so that it doesn't get all air dry. Put that in the fridge. That is awesome. Okay, that's going to set up in no time. I'll be able to cut those right at the end. We're going to get set up here for our donut puff dipping station. So you want to make sure you have a good area cleared off and ready to go. I have got the rest of that melted butter in the pot that I melted it in, and I'm going to leave it there because dishes. So it's still warm, it's still melty. All I need to do is dip into it. I'm going to keep that there. I want my cinnamon and sugar mixture. We need to mix half a cup of white sugar and a teaspoon of cinnamon in a bowl. Let's see, I've got my bowls here. Half a cup of white sugar. This also, you could definitely use raw sugar. If for this you really, really wanted kind of a different flavor, you could use light brown sugar. That would be delicious with the cinnamon. But again, it's a slightly different taste and texture, and it will absorb a little bit more, I think. So, kind of, you can, we went half a cup of white sugar. Okay, and then 1 teaspoon, where's my teaspoon? Cinnamon. Cinnamon goes a long way. It seems like that's not a very big ratio of cinnamon to sugar, but cinnamon, it will spread out very nicely in this amount of sugar, and it will taste just like that classic cinnamon sugar blend. So that's half a cup of sugar, 1 teaspoon cinnamon. That's pretty much your standard ratio for, like, if you buy that jar of cinnamon sugar that's pre-made, that's the same ratio. And then this way you can just make small amounts or really big amounts. I basically grew up on cinnamon toast. It was a great way to get whole wheat bread. My mom would make me whole wheat toast, a little bit of, I think back then it was margarine. The 80s were a different time. And cinnamon sugar. It's constant. So we've got our cinnamon sugar mix. You want to make sure that that's really well mixed together. Got your butter, melted butter. So you're kind of developing a station so that you don't have to make a big mess and move around a lot. The factory setup is really great for anything where you're doing a lot of the same thing over and over and over. Think about Henry Ford, how he got us prepared for that concept. So we're going to go butter first, sugar next, and then I'm going to put them onto the rack right here. So you kind of have your little flow set up. It's just quite a simple little dip. Let's see, do I need a releasing? Yeah. I'm going to use a little cake spatula to pop these out. They're not going to stick too much because I grease them. Yeah, just want to make sure that I'm not ripping them up or losing any of the edges. So we've got that really cute little muffin. I'm just going to dip the top, just the top, in a little bit of that melted butter, and then right into the cinnamon sugar. So I've got my delicious sugar-topped little muffin bite. And then I'm going to do that with all of them. All 24 are going to get lined up, all factory style. I'll do a few more here so everyone can see. You need to go around the edges and you don't have a cake spatula, you can use a butter knife just fine. If you want to dip your whole donut puff and toss the whole thing in melted butter and then the whole thing in cinnamon sugar, I'm not going to stop you. That sounds great. I'm just going to do the top. It makes it a little easier for me to hold on to it on one side. But if you were to do that with the whole thing, you just use like a slotted spoon, a little small spoon, and you could toss it around and then move it from one bowl to the next. And then you get fully coated cinnamon sugar bites.
think that either way, whatever makes you happy, that's the point of a donut muffin. So you can see, you just line them all up and get them all glazed. And if you wanted to put extra, you could drizzle more butter and then sprinkle more for a little extra crunch on top with more layers. But you just keep doing that, continuing with that with the donut puffs until they are ready to go. You could add other things into the batter. You could add in cinnamon and make the actual donut itself taste a little bit more cinnamony. But the nutmeg, then balanced with the cinnamon from this coating, they go together really, really well. Plus the nutmeg is just sort of it's a classic little cake spice for a breakfast treat. These are going to be so good. You could definitely, if you wanted more cinnamon in your sugar, this is the standard. I think it's going to be the perfect mix. You want to kind of make sure that your cinnamon sugar mix, though, is well mixed. If you need to remix it through the process, then double check it. If you're getting little clumps of butter or anything from when you're dipping, just kind of mix it all together so that you get a nice smooth coating on the next donut that you're putting in. So it's just a little dip, butter into the sugar. We've got our sweet little glazed muffin. So one bite of those, it's basically a 1 bite or a 2 bite treat. One of those, in the car on the way to work or something in the morning is really, really nice. And like I said, these freeze really well. You can freeze them with the cinnamon sugar on them for sure. When you thaw them, they're not going to be as necessarily like coated in what you can see as a crystally sugar coating, but it's going to still be in there because it will have kind of absorbed into the moisture on the top of the muffin. But you could absolutely freeze them like this, uncoated. Just bake a whole bunch of them, pop them into like a freezer bag, and freeze them for, I would say, a couple of months. They don't get too freezer burned, and then pull them out, thaw them out, and then you could do the dipping or tossing with whatever sugars. You could even do this with powdered sugar. You wouldn't. You would just have to get the non-absorbing kind of powdered sugar, which is actually a thing, and that's how people do that. That's how powdered donuts exist, because real confectioner sugar wants to absorb into food. So there's a non-absorbing powdered sugar. But you can get that. And so if you wanted, you could toss these with and make little powdered sugar bites, or you could make a chocolate glaze, which is just half chocolate chips, like a semi-sweet or a bittersweet, or even a dark chocolate chip, mixed with cream. So equal parts chocolate and cream, and you melt the chocolate over a full hot water bath, or you can melt it in the microwave and then mix in the cream and get it hot and get it mixed together. Simple chocolate glazes are easy to make. You can look them up online. You could even just look up ganache, which is like a simple classic chocolate glaze. And then you could dip the top of these in a chocolate glaze instead and have little chocolate donut muffins, which is nice. You could do a whole little assortment. And instead of eating a whole dozen donuts, you're just having a couple bites of donuts, which is really good. Better, good for your soul maybe, but also better for your heart to not have deep fried dozen donuts. So I'm going to set some of these aside. I will finish sugaring these after class, and I will obviously post a full-size photo so everyone can see close-up shots and everything. I do, though, want to get those bars. I want to check on them. I know it's only been about 7 minutes, maybe. I think I'm going to stick mine in the freezer just for our class time's sake. If possible. All right. Just for a few minutes until the last minute, I want to show you what we're going to be, how I'm going to be cutting them. It's not complex. You just take that nice foil or plastic or paper wrapping, which you made, and we're going to take them out onto our cutting board and then remove them from that bottom. We don't want to cut through the foil or the plastic. Then we're just going to slice them into about as thick as we might want. This recipe makes 10, but that's if you were making it in an 8-by-8-inch baking dish. So mine are obviously going to be a little askewed. I also prefer my little breakfast bars maybe shorter than that pan is wide. So I'm going to cut them in half and then into shorter bites. You can cut them however you might think you might want to eat them. This mixture is also really great for kids. You can just make them in a ball, and you have little granola bar like bites, and then set them up on a cookie tray and let them firm up in the fridge or the freezer that way. That's it's a good option. So these hold up on your counter in an airtight container just for a few days, because depending on the temperature, obviously it might last longer if it's colder. But as it warms up, the peanut butter and the honey warm up, and so they will kind of start to want to fall apart over time. And obviously oats and nuts like that, they'll get stale. So if you wanted to make a big batch of them, you could freeze some of them and then pull them out, let them thaw, and then cut them. So what I would do is make a big brick of them and freeze it whole. It'll make the bars in the middle seem fresher when you cut into them after you thaw them out. So that's one way to do that. But it's such a quick and easy recipe that I tend to just make a batch this size that I know I'm going to eat in the time that they are still good to go. And then you can kind of throw together another batch. And then that way you're not really stuck with the same mix-ins. Like in 2 weeks, I might be sick of dried cranberries, and maybe I want to have something different, like some whole grain brown rice puffs. You can get those pre-puffed, you can mix those into bars. Chia and other kinds of seeds would be a great addition. So if you make too many of something, then you're stuck eating it for the rest of your life. That's kind of one mentality. So while we're waiting really quick for that to finish, I'm going to look what my notes were on next week. What did I think we were going to get into? Well, we've only got a couple more weeks, and I was thinking that we could do sort of like a full, like a final exam, but not really testing anybody, but do some, like a blue plate special, what they would call it at a truck stop. We could make, I want to teach poached eggs. I want to teach these hilarious tater tot waffles, and I want to teach how to make flavored syrups and different things. So we would be making like a whole plate of food. I'll send the recipe out. I hope that sounds fun. Sounds fun to me. Sounds kind of delicious to me also, but it's like it's my gourmet culinary school version of truck stop food. So that's kind of what we're going to be doing, and then we're going to have to think about what to do for the final class, which I think is going to be coming up soon. I can't believe this quarter is actually almost done. Right, bars. Last but not least, let's see. So you might want to let yours set up a little bit longer depending on if you went straight into the freezer or not. I think that I'll be able to at least cut off some edges and show you what we're working with here. How easy this part is, this is the best part of why we did that, because that just comes right out of the dish. And my favorite is clean. So you just want to fold back your edges, no matter what it was, foil or paper or plastic, just to get it kind of loosened up. Mine is definitely not set up as I would want it to be, so I'm actually going to leave it on the foil partially so that I can kind of wrap it back up to put it back in the fridge, because I do want to be able to cut bars from this and make it good and then take good pictures of it. But in the meantime, I want to show you what you would do first. If yours is square or rectangle or whatever shape yours is, you kind of want to cut off the edges. The edges are well, they're what we call Scooby snacks in the industry. It's what you get to eat when you're making food for everybody else. But especially for me, I kind of want to create a squared off edge. So I'm just going to quickly, firmly go down with my knife. It's kind of like a guillotine cut. You need to be pretty firm with the chop so that you make sure you chop down through those nuts or any of the bigger pieces of anything firmly, and it's not going to create broken edges of your bar. So mine is very flat, so my bars are going to actually not be vertical, they're horizontal bars. So I'm going to be cutting mine in half this way and then into bars this way so that my bars actually form along these lines. So let's see, I will be cutting it in half here. And then creating bars like this. Depending on the size of your pan, if you used a much smaller pan, like you could even do this in a loaf pan, then you would maybe cut your bars would be more of a vertical cut because it would be a much taller experience. Mine is a very flat, shallow pan, so I got flat, shallow bars, which means I am creating them by cutting them this way along the sort of horizontal plane. I don't want to waste too much food. I don't need that many Scooby snacks today, so I'm not going to square off all my edges. You can see the bar is cutting. I need a few more minutes to set up, but it's actually holding together surprisingly well. And it is full of energy and natural nutrition. And when you eat that for breakfast, along with maybe one little bite of a donut puff, you're going to have a good morning. So like I said, I want to keep mine here so I can wrap it back up. I want it to set up. You want it to set up as a whole unit before you cut it, rather than letting it set up in pre-cut bar form. This just kind of creates more of a dense pack bar if you let it do that. So I just need a few more minutes on mine. Hopefully yours are ready or are ready soon. But I just wanted to make sure that I showed you a good example of how you want to cut through that. But again, like I said, you can make little squares, you can make little triangles, you could get a cookie cutter out, you could have fun with this. You could cut them into shapes for kids, that would be really great. And then you have lots of little edges you can make into Scooby snacks. But here's the fun part. That edge that I cut off, there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually still quite sticky, and if I just pack it together, squeeze it in a ball in my hand, then it makes like a little granola bar bite, and you can make a bunch of those with all of your little scraps and save that in a separate little Ziploc, and you've got a little pop of a bite. Those are really fun when they set up when they're cold. Keep them in the freezer. They're a really nice little fun treat. All right, so don't let any of it go to waste, even when you're cutting off the scraps. It's really good to just squeeze it together in a ball. And line them up on a tray and maybe freeze them, and then keep them in a Ziploc. And they're a really nice little mini treat. So you get a lot out of these recipes. But that's why we do that with gloves or plastic on our hands, because immediately my hands are sticky and covered in oats. So that's, there's some of those helpful tips. Hopefully you guys made this. If not, I hope you make it soon. Let me know how it turns out. We're just in time. Class is done in 2 minutes. I'm not going to chase you off. If anyone has any questions, I see the chat box. I'm so sorry I missed this earlier. You can absolutely add vanilla to everything, always. If you wanted to add vanilla to the bars, that would be incredibly delicious and really bring out the flavor. What I like for these bars is the combination of about a half a teaspoon of vanilla, and then you can get, you know, those they're like freeze-dried wild blueberries. They're like the little packs of dried wild blueberries. Amazing addition with the vanilla and the granola bars. Yeah, really great. You can even add a little touch of vanilla to the donut puffs, and I would have gone with for that recipe, yeah, about a half a teaspoon. You don't want to overpower, but that would really highlight. You can add vanilla to everything all the time. Yeah. And then good. For the granola bars, is there any substitute almond butter or peanut butter? Can you have sunflower butter? Sometimes that's an alternative that works for people, or are seeds really bad for everybody? If you can have sunflower butter, then that works perfectly well as an alternative in this option. If you can't have any of those at all, there are definitely other things that you can use. I'm trying to think what would be a similar. I'm gonna have to look up some other recipes that I've used in the past, just because a lot of them do use variations on the nut and the seed butters. You can use even like sesame seed to tahini and have a completely different flavor, but it would be the right kind of consistency. If sunflower seeds are a problem, then I would go with that's tough. This recipe might not be the right one if all of the nut butters and seed butters are out of the question. So I will absolutely research one of the other recipes that I've made for bars that don't use this. It's more of a agave syrup mixed with the dates, mixed with the oats, and it has a lot of chia in it, which is an absorbing ingredient. And that ingredient didn't have any nut butter in it. So you could leave out nuts and you could make that. I'll look that up and I'll send that to you. But if you can have sunflower seed butter, then that would be a great alternative and it would taste really yummy too. I think that was all of the questions. Yeah, cool. Hopefully that helps. If anyone thinks of anything else, you can always email me or find me on our Instagram at UCLA Teaching Kitchen. And if you do, always send me pictures. People have been sending pictures and I've just been loving it. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you. I'm so glad that you joined in this morning. Well, we have a few more weeks coming up, so definitely. And then we've got other classes. So I'm doing our kids class tomorrow. We're making baked ziti whole wheat pasta with veggies and tomato sauce and garlic bread. And then in our Thursday class, we are making a whole roasted chicken. Because everyone is afraid of that, and I want to teach people that it's a wonderful thing. Don't be afraid of roasting a chicken. So that's other fun classes coming up, and I will send out recipes and all the information about next week once I've got it. Thank you everybody for being here.